you all for taking some of your time to be here. And before I go any further, you see a lovely lady sitting over here. Miss Mary, my bride, is with us tonight. We're excited about that. I want to thank all of you, and especially, we want to thank our friend, Lucky Chesley. Lucky, thank you for a remarkable introduction. And more than that, thank you for your service. And Lucky's presence here and seeing some caps on some other distinguished Americans leads me to make this first request this evening. If you have worn the uniform of our country, either in wartime or in peacetime, if you have served in our armed forces, if you are a United States veteran, would you please stand and be recognized by our assembly today? Thank you. Thank you all for your service. And the second question is very similar to it. If you currently have a loved one serving in the armed forces, maybe here stateside or in some far-flung posting around the world, or yes, even in a combat zone, or if your loved one has just completed a tour of duty and is a newly minted veteran, if you have a loved one currently serving or has just completed their service, would you please stand and be recognized? Look at this. Thank you all so very much. Now, if you needed any further evidence that the year 2010 is a different kind of campaign year, you're going to get it right now. Because we should acknowledge at the outset that the man who I oppose for the Republican nomination for the United States Senate, our senior senator, could have stood to both requests. As a new generation of McCains has answered the call to military service, and of course, as Lucky mentioned, and indeed, with Lucky present there, everyone knows the very real sacrifice and service of our senior senator. And yet, it is precisely because of that service, proffered by John McCain to be sure, but by others here like Lucky Chesley and those who stood up with family members who now stand in the breach, that we are able, as a free people, to make a determination about our nation's future, because we settle these questions. And don't get me wrong, I'm pleased with my bona fides on the Second Amendment, an A rating from the National Rifle Association, the endorsement of Gun Owners of America. And while I believe in the Second Amendment, I also rejoice in the fact that here we settle policy disagreements with ballots instead of bullets. And so it will be in our primary on August 24th. Now, very quickly, we'll turn this from a monologue into a dialogue, but if you would indulge me for just a second, a couple of personal notes in this endeavor. If you one day decide to run for public office and you want to engender a whole lot of attention, just make sure you challenge your party's nominee for the presidency 2 years prior, because the attention has been incredible even tonight. A few reporters join us. One gentleman introduced himself from a British publication. I'll have more on that in just a second, but the international interest in this race has been something remarkable. A couple of months ago, we were down, forgive me, Larry, it's the old broadcaster in me, but I just can't resist this alliterative phrase. We were down in the tiny town of Tonopah, and more than 200 Tonopahans, I guess that's the way we'd say it, showed up on a Saturday afternoon. We had a great town hall meeting, and also in attendance was a video crew from a network bearing the initials NHK. N as in Nippon, as in Japanese television. Then a couple of weeks after that, you have to love the vagaries of Arizona geography. Wouldn't you know, the town of Maricopa is located across the county line in Pinal. And so maybe some of you were there, a great tea party gathering one Sunday afternoon when things started to warm up. And embracing the warmth of our Arizona desert was a crew from Dutch television. And then even prior to that, Miss Mary and I believe it was the Palo Verde Republican women were having a gathering, and this is partially for the benefit of our British guest tonight. But another British cousin was here. I believe he covered the gathering for the Daily Telegraph. At any rate, he introduced your speaker tonight thusly, and I quote now for you. Hayworth, the candidate of broad shoulders, excellent vocal projection, and Trump-like hair. Now I will say to my friend from The Observer, perhaps he'd like to get the real scoop. There's no Velcro attached here. It is not done up in a coiffure like a turban. And of course, if a quick examination of the bank account indicates there aren't the millions there that the Donald might have in his checking account. But I offer that, for a cheap laugh and to recognize folks that come in. But there's actually a broader point I want to make about this. Our international visitors, the international journalists who come to cover this campaign, after visiting with us, instinctively seem to understand what this is all about, in stark contrast to those reporters who deign to visit us from newsrooms in New York City and in Washington, D.C. To their credit, unflattering images aside, the international reporters understand what you and I understand about this critical election year 2010. First, last, and always, it is about this document, the Constitution of the United States. You may remember the story from your school days, the year 1787, the place Philadelphia. Both Cleon Skousen and Catherine Drinker Bowen wrote of the events that summer, and both of them called it the miracle at Philadelphia, the time of our Constitutional Convention. And maybe you recall the story, a matriarch of Philadelphia high society happened to have her granddaughter in tow when she encountered Benjamin Franklin. She shouted to him, "Dr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us?" And he responded, "A republic if you can keep it." That admonition rings in our ears 2 centuries and 2 decades later, especially following the inauguration of the 44th President of the United States, who in one of his first actions, and it is interesting when you check Mr. Obama's resume, he says that he has served as a professor of constitutional law. Of course, he doesn't specify which constitution. At any rate, we had the rather disturbing spectacle of our new president picking up the telephone and calling the chief executive officer of what ostensibly is still a private corporation, and in essence, firing that CEO. You will search in vain in our Constitution and the powers granted to the executive branch. You will find nothing there that gives a president such authority. Worse still, just in time for Christmas, our 44th president,